Good morning to you. I'm Danilo Evangelista, and welcome to our weekly video, weekly tropical weather outlook today, Saturday, January 25th, 2025. This is, I think, the last video discussion of the month of January. So next Saturday, I think, will be February, and we'll be 1 month closer, to hurricane season. Let's get started today by just generally looking at what's going on in terms of global tropics. I like to do this from time to time because, as always, even if there's not activity happening in our neck of the woods in the northern hemisphere, there is activity always happening around the globe somewhere in terms of the tropics, especially in the southern hemisphere right now, where it is indeed their tropical season. And as you can see, in the southern Indian Ocean, there are a few areas of interest. Two areas, Invest 93S and Invest 92S. I'm not familiar with the impacts that these will bring, but looks like there are areas of interest active right now. Maybe we might see some development out of these two, maybe not. Not necessarily familiar with what's going on down there, but nonetheless, there is activity in the world right now happening in the southern hemisphere. So there's that. Let's move on to sea surface temperature anomalies in the our neck of the woods, right here in the Western Hemisphere. Starting off with the Atlantic, as always, has been warm over the last several weeks, and it continues to remain warm, especially through the deep tropics and off the eastern coast of Africa. And obviously, if this were to persist into hurricane season, it would be a very interesting signal. But for now, it is nothing more than just a fact, I guess, that the Atlantic is very warm and above normal, and especially into the Gulf too. Notice how this sort of area pokes out. That's the loop current, I believe, really poking out. And the anomalies too, very warm, 3 to 4, more like 2 to 3 degrees Celsius above normal in the Gulf. And most of the Gulf in general still remaining much above normal, although you're starting to see some of these colder shelf waters appear, and off the East Coast as well. All a symptom of the very cold Arctic air mass that we've had over the eastern half of the United States over the last several weeks. But that is going to warm up, and we're going to talk about that in just a moment. Meanwhile, in the Pacific, cold off the Baja Peninsula, and this is also interesting to watch too, because this will also have implications on hurricane season, not only in the Atlantic, but in the Eastern Pacific as well. Lots of things are connected when it comes to sea surface temperature anomalies in the oceans worldwide. They have impacts on certain basins that sometimes you may not even know about. But this too is also very interesting, and I'll definitely watch it as we move through the winter. But more specifically, and probably the most important area, is along the equatorial Pacific. That also remains cold right now. Was also, especially down here in the Eastern Pacific, was warmer, especially if you go back to last week, or at least I remember it being a lot warmer here. But I guess trade winds have kind of picked up once again along the equatorial Pacific, and things have begun to cool down. And you can actually take a look at that with the current sea surface temperature anomalies. La Nina definitely still in place. We've actually dropped pretty significantly from very close to the neutral line, which is around negative zero point 0.5 over the last week or so. And now we're down to negative 1 Celsius below normal. So definitely a resurgence, a mini resurgence in La Nina that we've had over the last several weeks. Why? Well, if you take a look at the SOI, the average 30 days is still in the negatives. The positive territory also still remains in the 90-day average of the SOI. But look at this, the daily contribution to the SOI coming in pretty positive. And if you actually look at the daily contribution over the last several days, they're coming in pretty positive, especially right here, January 21st, earlier this week, a daily contribution of 22 points, positive 22. And by the way, if you're not familiar with the SOI, pretty much this measures pressure patterns in the Pacific, and it creates an index which indicates the strength, I guess, of trade winds in the Pacific. And a positive SOI correlates more with stronger trade winds and La Nina, and a negative SOI correlates more with weaker trade winds and El Nino. So the fact that we have some of these very positive SOI values indicates strengthening trade winds. And as such, we've seen a brief resurgence, I guess, in La Nina coming back a little bit over the last week or so. And you can see this as well in the zonal wind anomalies right along the equatorial Pacific, especially as we headed into, especially as we came into the first part of the month of January coming in from last year. You can notice in the equatorial Pacific, this is what this region represents. So this is roughly the international date line. So this is the Central Pacific. And right here, as we were heading into the month of January, trade winds weakened. Obviously, we saw that. The ENSO warmed up, especially through mid-month. We saw the Eastern Pacific warm up significantly, and now look at where we are late month and this bottom section. The forecast going into the future, of course, the forecast from the GFS for the zonal winds. Notice all of these purples and blues in the equatorial Pacific, definitely meaning strengthening trade winds occurring. So we'll probably see a brief resurgence of La Nina, at least as we head into the early part of February. And this also has to do not only with the SOI strengthening, but also MJO in the world right now, generally favorable for strengthening of trade winds in the Pacific. And it'll be a very interesting thing to watch, especially over these next several weeks. How does La Nina fare out? Are we going to see strengthening like the trade winds indicate? We're going to see some strengthening in the trade winds and maybe a persistence of a decent strength La Nina over the next several weeks, or eventually are weaker trade winds going to return, and are we going to see a weaker ENSO or a weakening of La Nina into a warmer ENSO? And this is something we'll be watching, especially with the CFS forecast. And I've actually not brought this up so far, but this is the CFS forecast, just to really quickly review it over the next several months. And this is actually based on a tri-monthly period, so this is based off of seasons. And you notice the CFS generally forecasting gradual weakening of the La Nina. They keep us in cold neutral territory, especially as we head towards the spring and into the summer. And there is that infamous ASO, August, September, October period, which is the peak of the Atlantic hurricane season. And we're generally in cold neutral. So I guess the CFS is indicating that we'll be on a colder trajectory, that we won't come out of La Nina very fast. And I guess if these trade winds in the Pacific persist, that might be the case. But if we have a warmer ENSO, that'll also have its different implications on the hurricane season as well. All things we'll be watching very closely over the next several weeks, especially as we close out this month and as we head once again into the month of February, which I believe, once again, next week's video, I think might be the first video for our weekly updates that we do in February. So that'll be very interesting, and we'll be definitely getting closer and closer to hurricane season, clearly. But enough of the tropics now, because there's not much else to talk about in terms of that. Let's go to United States weather. What's going on across the lower 48 today? Not much. A few winter weather advisories, probably some snow in elevated mountains, and there's also some winter storm watches, and also a few winter storm warnings in effect. This is probably, once again, higher elevation snow expected. And then there's also some of these red flag warnings in effect for portions of Arizona. So keep mindful of that. Besides that, the eastern portion of the United States remaining quiet, especially after all of that cold air that we've had for the entire week so far. That's moving out, and we're about to see a huge warm-up come for especially portions of the east and the southeast. So if you're not a fan, or if you were not a fan of all of the cold and the snow that we had, especially along the Gulf Coast, relief is coming on the way this week. And let's just actually really quickly run the GFS to see what happens. Generally stays quiet over the next day or so. Looks like a system moves through the south, brings some rain, and not much happens. There's a clipper that seems to develop across the northern mid-lakes, and then seems to bring some light snow to portions of the Northeast and New England heading into mid to late next week. And then as we head into the 5-day time frame, seems like a system develops over the southern U.S. And this might actually be a severe weather setup. There's a lot of talk once again, and you could actually see it here. Very strong ridge sets up over the eastern U.S. Airflow coming in straight from the Gulf, and then there's a trough that develops out west and digs eastward. Classic severe weather setup. And I'd imagine with the warm Gulf that we have right now, there's probably more than enough moisture to bring south into the Gulf. And looks like the setup might be there as we head into late next week for potential severe weather setup, and then across the northern Midwest and the northern plains, snow. And you can see that as well on the Climate Prediction Center outlook for the next 6 to 10 days as we wrap up the month of January heading into February. Look at that. You see a bunch of oranges and reds indicating temperatures will be above normal. So we'll have warmer air, ridge will set up in the east, warmer air over the south, and it looks like that maybe will set up for potential severe weather or some sort of disturbed weather system over the south as we head into next week. And let's really quickly, you can see the temperature anomalies too. Yeah, look at that. Cold, it actually still remains cold though across portions of the Northeast. So if you're in the Northeast, especially New England, sorry, you're not getting that thaw, that January thaw just yet. But once again, warmer air comes in, and eventually it spreads through the entire eastern half of the United States as we head into February. So if you're not a fan of the cold weather, don't worry, relief is coming on the way, and probably with that, more unsettled weather as well is on the way too. So there's that situation in terms of weather in the United States. Other than that, not much else to talk about. So I guess we're going to wrap it up for today. If you like what you saw today, and if you are very interested in these videos, especially these weekly tropical weather outlook videos, I do them every Saturday. So if you're new to my channel, if you want to look forward to more of these videos each week, would definitely recommend, if you like, comment, subscribe, share with family and friends as well. I also do sometimes United States weather videos throughout the week. Tried doing them this past week, especially with our snowstorm that we had across the South. A very bizarre situation indeed. Also subscribe to my YouTube channel for that as well. With that being said, thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed today's video. Stay safe, peace, love, and kindness to you all, and we'll talk again next week.